I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who cheats. But then again, I never thought my life would turn out this way. My name is Lily, and I've been married to Jake for 6 years. He's a good man, too good probably. The kind of man who sees the best in people, who would step in front of a bullet for me without a second thought. I should have loved him more for that. It started on a Saturday night. Jake and I had gone out to a club, a place I picked, full of neon lights and throbbing bass, the kind of place he hated but endured for me. He never liked clubs. Too loud, too many people. But I thrived in them. I loved the attention, the feeling of being watched. And that night I got exactly what I wanted. We were drinking, dancing, and then it happened. A group of men approached, their eyes dark with something unreadable. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a cruel smirk, zeroed in on me. His name was Ryan, and he had the kind of presence that made people step aside. He leaned in too close, whispered something in my ear that made my skin flush. Jake saw it. He stepped between us, his jaw tight, his hands fisting at his sides. "She's with me," he said, voice calm but firm. Ryan only laughed. "Yeah? You sure about that?" The fight happened fast. Jake swung first. He always did have that protective streak, but it was 5 against 1. They didn't just fight him. They beat him. Hard. Fists and boots, laughter ringing in my ears as I screamed for them to stop. Blood on the floor. A sickening crunch when one of them landed a final kick to his ribs. And then they were gone. Just like that. I stayed with Jake at the hospital. I held his hand, cried over him. He was bruised, broken. But he was still Jake. Still mine. At least that's what I told myself. Because 2 weeks later I was back at that club. And I was meeting Ryan. I told myself I was just going for a drink. Just to clear my head. That's what I said as I slipped into the same dress I'd worn that night. The one Jake loved. The one he had tried to pull me away from the club in. Just before he. I shook off the thought. The club was exactly how I remembered it. Dim lights, sticky floors. A bass-heavy song vibrating in my bones. But this time something felt different. My heart pounded not from excitement, but from something darker. And then I saw him. Ryan. He was at the bar, relaxed. A cigarette burning between his fingers despite the no-smoking sign glowing behind him. His smirk was the same, that lazy, predatory grin like he'd been expecting me. Maybe he had been. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said as I approached. I swallowed hard, but I didn't stop walking. "I didn't think you would either." He chuckled. "And yet here you are." I should have left right then. Turned around, walked out, gone back to Jake and pretended none of this had ever happened. But I didn't. Because I needed something from Ryan. Something I wasn't ready to admit to myself. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice barely above the music. Ryan tilted his head, studying me. "Do what?" My fingers curled into fists. "Beat him like that." For the first time his smirk faded. He exhaled smoke slowly, watching me through the haze. "You really want to know?" I nodded. He leaned in so close I could feel the heat of him. Smell the whiskey on his breath. "Because someone wanted it done." The words sent a chill down my spine. I stepped back. "What?" Ryan tapped his cigarette against the ashtray. "You heard me. That wasn't just some random bar fight, sweetheart. Someone wanted your husband hurt." He flicked his gaze over me. And if I had to guess, it wasn't a stranger. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Ryan's eyes gleamed. "Still want to have that drink?" My mind screamed at me to run, to leave, to never come back. But my feet stayed rooted to the spot, because somewhere deep inside, a terrible question had taken hold. If this wasn't just a fight, who had wanted Jake hurt? And worse, how deep was I already in? The words clung to me, thick and suffocating like smoke in my lungs. Someone wanted your husband hurt. Ryan was watching me, amused, like he could see the storm brewing in my mind. He took another slow drag of his cigarette, the red ember flaring, casting a glow over his sharp features. I should have walked away. I should have turned on my heel and run straight home to Jake, to the man who had defended me without hesitation. But I didn't. Instead I sat down. Ryan's smirk deepened as he motioned to the bartender. "Whiskey?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I hesitated, then nodded. The glass was set in front of me with a dull clink, the amber liquid swirling like molten fire under the dim club lights. I wrapped my fingers around it, the chill of the glass grounding me. Who? My voice barely carried over the music, but Ryan heard me. He exhaled slowly, dragging a finger along the rim of his own glass. Now that's the real question, isn't it? Frustration clawed at my insides. Don't play games with me. Ryan leaned in, close enough that I felt the heat of his breath against my cheek. Oh, sweetheart, I don't play games. I just enjoy watching people figure out truths they don't want to know. My grip tightened around the glass. You said someone wanted him hurt. If not you, then who? Ryan chuckled, shaking his head like he pitied me. Why do you care so much? You're here, aren't you? Sitting with me. Having a drink. His eyes flicked down to my lips, then back up. You knew exactly what you were doing when you came back here. I hated that part of me knew he was right. I took a sip of the whiskey, the burn tracing a path down my throat, hot and bitter. I had come here looking for something. I just didn't know what. Ryan studied me for a long moment before finally speaking. Your husband? He's got enemies. I frowned. Jake doesn't have enemies. Ryan laughed. A deep, rich sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Oh, sweetheart, everyone has enemies. He took a slow sip of his drink before adding, especially self-righteous men who think they can't be touched. I felt a stab of something, guilt, anger, fear. Jake was self-righteous in his own way. He always did the right thing even when it cost him. It was one of the reasons I fell in love with him. And yet, here I was, sitting across from the man who had nearly beaten him to death. Tell me, I demanded. Ryan exhaled through his nose like he was weighing the decision. Then he leaned in. His lips just inches from my ear. Find out who your husband's been pissing off, sweetheart. And when you do, he pulled back, his eyes dark and knowing. Come back and tell me if you still think he's the good guy. A cold wave washed over me. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp against the music. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my purse, my mind a whirlwind of doubt, confusion and something else. Guilt. Because deep down a part of me already knew I would come back. And that terrified me more than anything else. I drove home with my fingers clenched around the steering wheel, my mind drowning in Ryan's words. Find out who your husband's been pissing off. And then tell me if you still think he's the good guy. The thought slithered through me like a snake, coiling in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to dismiss it, to shove it away and tell myself that Ryan was just trying to manipulate me. But I couldn't. Because something was off. The way Jake had barely reacted to the attack. How he never once asked me for details about that night. Never tried to find out who those men were. As if he already knew. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my chest was tight with questions I didn't have answers to. The house was dark except for the soft glow coming from the living room. I stepped inside quietly, the scent of old wood and Jake's cologne lingering in the air. I half expected to find him asleep on the couch, but instead he was awake, sitting at the dining table, his eyes trained on a glass of whiskey. Jake rarely drank. I hesitated in the doorway. You're still up. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the liquid catch the light. When he finally lifted his gaze, something unreadable flashed in his expression. Where were you? His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge beneath it. My pulse jumped. I just went for a drive. He let out a breath, then stood up, walking toward me with slow, deliberate steps. You smell like whiskey, he said, brushing a thumb over my wrist. His touch was gentle, but his eyes were sharp, searching. I forced a smile. I stopped for a drink. A drink. He let the words hang between us. His jaw flexed as he studied my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing in front of a stranger. He wasn't buying it. And suddenly I wondered just how much he already knew. I stepped back. It's late. I'm going to bed. Jake didn't stop me, but as I turned to walk away, his voice followed me like a shadow. You don't have to lie, Lily. I froze. The room felt too still, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. I turned my head just enough to see him standing there, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I know you went back there. Ice spread through my veins. Went back where? He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Don't do that. He looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Not anger. Not betrayal. Resignation. Like he had been waiting for this. "You went back to that club," he said quietly. "You saw him." I couldn't breathe. Jake took a slow step closer, his voice soft but firm. "So tell me, Lily, what did Ryan have to say?" Jake's words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the moments before a storm. "So tell me, Lily, what did Ryan have to say?" I forced myself to stay still, to keep my face blank, but my heart was a war drum against my ribs. "How do you know his name?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Jake exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. His knuckles were still faintly bruised from that night. "Because I know exactly who he is." A chill ran down my spine. Jake stepped closer, and this time I didn't move away. "Ryan's not just some thug at a club," he said, voice calm. But there was something dangerous beneath it. "He's a problem I thought I'd buried a long time ago." I swallowed. "Buried?" Jake sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. "I didn't want you involved in this, Lily. I never did." He took a breath, then looked at me, really looked at me. "But it seems like you already are." A lump formed in my throat. "What are you talking about?" Jake hesitated, as if deciding how much truth he was willing to give me. Then finally he spoke. "I used to run with people like him." I stared at him. "What?" "It was years ago," Jake continued. "Before I met you. Before I built this life. Back then I was desperate and I made bad choices. Did things I'm not proud of." He glanced down at his bruised knuckles. "Ryan was part of that world. But when I got out, I left people behind." His gaze darkened. "Some of them didn't take it well." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "Are you saying that attack wasn't random?" Jake shook his head. "No. It was payback." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my husband, his quiet strength, his relentless work ethic, the way he always seemed so in control, was shifting, cracking at the foundation. I backed up until my legs hit the edge of the couch, forcing me to sit. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jake exhaled sharply. "Because I wanted to protect you. Because I thought," he hesitated, jaw tightening. "I thought if I worked hard enough, if I built something good, the past would stay buried." He let out a hollow laugh. "Guess I was wrong." I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to process it all. "So what happens now?" Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he finally said, "That depends on you." I looked up at him sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jake's eyes searched mine. "I saw the way you looked at him, Lily." My breath caught. Jake took a step closer, his voice quieter now. "You went back there." Another step. "You sought him out." His expression darkened. "So tell me, Lily, are you looking for answers?" He was in front of me now, towering over me. "Or are you looking for something else?" A sharp breath escaped me. I wanted to deny it, to scream no, but the words tangled in my throat. Because I didn't know the answer. Because for a moment, just a moment, when I had sat across from Ryan listening to him speak in riddles, I had felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Thrill. Jake's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "That's what I thought." I flinched. "Jake. Just tell me one thing, Lily." His voice was eerily calm. "Are you done looking for trouble?" I hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw something in Jake's face shift. Something broke. His jaw tightened, his expression closing off like a steel door. That's all I needed to know. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the dark, surrounded by questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to anymore. Jake walked away, but the weight of his presence lingered in the room like a ghost. I wanted to call out to him, to say something, anything that would fix what had just happened. But I didn't, because I didn't know if I wanted to fix it. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. The revelation of Jake's past, the knowledge that the attack wasn't random, and the way he had looked at me, like he had already lost me. Had he? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't sleep. Not with this storm inside me twisting, pulling me in a direction I didn't want to name. And that's why I found myself back at the club. The moment I walked in, I spotted him. Ryan. He was lounging in a corner booth, his eyes already on me, as if he had been expecting me. The smirk he wore was slow, deliberate. "Look who came back," he mused, swirling a glass of dark liquor in his hand. Didn't take long. I swallowed, stepping closer. I need answers. Ryan gestured to the seat across from him. Then sit. I hesitated, my heart pounding. I should have left. I should have turned around and gone home to Jake, to my marriage, to the life I had built. But instead I sat down. Ryan leaned forward, studying me. Let me guess. Jake finally told you the truth. I nodded stiffly. And now you don't know who to believe, he murmured, amusement flickering in his eyes. I exhaled sharply. Just tell me why. Why now? Why come after him after all these years? Ryan tilted his head, watching me like a predator sizing up prey. Because, sweetheart, Jake wasn't as clean as you think. He didn't just walk away from that life. He burned it. And when you burn people like that, they don't forget. A cold chill crawled up my spine. What do you mean? Ryan smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. Let's just say your husband didn't just leave. He took something with him. And there are people who really want it back. I shook my head. You're lying. Ryan leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Aren't you tired of hearing lies? My breath hitched, because deep down I was tired. Tired of not knowing who my husband really was. Tired of feeling like I was playing a role in a life that wasn't mine anymore. Tired of pretending I didn't feel something electric when I was near Ryan. And then it happened. He reached for my hand. Just a simple touch. Fingertips grazing mine. A silent invitation. I could have pulled away. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. I let it happen. And the moment I did, I knew. This wasn't just a betrayal of Jake. It was a betrayal of myself. The guilt hit me like a freight train. I yanked my hand back, standing so fast the table shook. Ryan only chuckled, unfazed. You're not ready yet, he said, finishing his drink. But you will be. I turned and bolted. When I got home, the house was dark. For a moment I thought Jake had gone to bed. That maybe by some miracle I could pretend tonight had never happened. But then I saw him. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands folded in front of him. And on the table, next to his whiskey glass, was his gun. The sight made my stomach drop. Jake! Don't! His voice was quiet. Tired. I swallowed hard. You went back to him. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Shame burned through me. Jake, You don't have to explain. He finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes terrified me. Not anger. Not betrayal. Acceptance. Like he had been expecting this all along. I took a shaky breath. What happens now? Jake exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the table. You tell me. I felt like I was suffocating. I don't want this. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then why do you keep running to him? I had no answer. Silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. Then Jake stood, grabbing the gun, and for one horrible moment I thought, no. Please no. But he didn't raise it. Instead, he tucked it into his waistband, then walked past me without another word. Jake! My voice cracked. He stopped at the door but didn't turn around. I can't make you choose me, Lily. A pause. But I also won't stand here and watch you tear yourself apart trying to decide. Then he was gone. And just like that I realized I had lost him. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Jake never came home. Called, I texted. Nothing. It was as if he had vanished. And Ryan was waiting. He had always been waiting. The first time I saw him again, I told myself I was just looking for answers. That I needed to understand Jake's past to fix things. But deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was looking for a way out. Ryan smirked as I walked toward him, his arms spreading as if he had already won. Took you long enough. And this time when he reached for me, I didn't pull away.